Hello, everyone, and welcome to my first episode of Behind the Stand. I'm your host, Stephanie. This podcast is going to be dedicated to true crime books, cases, and of course, the victims behind the crime. Each month, I'll be diving into a book or two and the crime behind the books. What did the books leave out? What did the books get right or wrong? And what did I personally like or dislike about each book? When listening to this podcast, please remember that some of what I say are of my own opinions. Today, for my first episode, I thought I would talk about my own top 2 best and worst true crime books that I have read. I want to give a disclaimer for trigger warnings, as I will be talking about murder, child murder, and rape, and other serious crimes. If at any time this podcast becomes just too much, feel free to turn it off and join me again next month. With that, let's go into Beyond the Stand. So the first book that I want to talk about that I absolutely love is Red River Girl, The Life and Death of Tina Fontaine by Joanna Jolly. So back when I first started my very first true crime book club, I was looking for books that we as a group could recommend, and this one really just caught my eye. I read the description. So Tina Fontaine was a 15-year-old who was murdered back in 2014, and this book just goes into the investigation that Winnipeg, Canada's investigation force and police force went in to try to solve her murder. The book goes into her tragic life, systemic issues facing Indigenous women, and the police investigation into her death. The book also talks about her home on the Sag King First Nation and her life of exploitation in the city. The book really highlights her story as just one of the many missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, not just in this area, but all over. So we didn't pick this book because I couldn't find an audiobook version of this book, and that's one of my criterias for picking true crime books for my book club is we have to have an audiobook. So unfortunately, I didn't pick this one, but I was curious enough about this book to pick it up for myself. Our library didn't have a copy, so I got it on Prospector, and it was about 2/3 of the way done when I had to return it back to Prospector. And I was so invested into this book. I actually went out, literally that day I had to return to Prospector, and I bought the book and I finished it within 2 days. I was so invested. This book is so incredibly sad. It's not one that I recommend to a lot of people. Spoiler alert, the killer was never caught. And so I know that a lot of people who like an open and shut case, who want this, they want to see justice. They want to see the killer behind bars. This is not a book for you. And I know this is not a book for a few of my patrons as well. But that's the only reason I don't recommend this book to absolutely everybody. But otherwise, this book is absolutely amazing. The writing is absolutely incredible. Joanna Jolly goes out and interviews literally everybody. I think she literally interviews everybody who knew Tina, who even knew the name Tina, and got every single story underneath the sun about Tina to write about her. Again, she uses this as like a jumping off point that she is not the only missing and murdered Indigenous woman out there, because she was missing for a few days and then her body turned up on the river. But what is very unique about her story is the police force, they tried their absolute hardest to a degree that I very rarely in the true crime see. I mean, they do a sting operation after sting operation to the guy they do believe murdered Tina. They put in an undercover cop for a year to try to catch this guy. admitting he killed Tina. An undercover cop. They bring him in multiple times and question him. They offer him plea deals to just say, yes, just admit that you did it. Just admit that you did it. But the writing is absolutely incredible. Jolly just goes above and beyond, getting, as I said, every single story she can about Tina from every single family member, from every single investigator on this team. Not just the lead investigator, but every single one of them who worked this case. Another fact that I really, really do like is that Tina led a very complex life. She faced a lot of exploitation, but the author never once, while laying out all the facts, made you even think for a second any of this was Tina's fault. And I think that is something that is very rare in books, where sometimes, whether it's sprinkled in or whether it's unintentional, the victim blaming gets in through the lines. I never felt that way with Red River Girl. I never once got that impression that Joanna Jolly was ever victim blaming. And that is something I didn't even realize that I needed in my books until I got done with it. And that was very refreshing. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Go out and read that book. I loved it. With that, let's go on to one of the worst books I've ever read. And that is You Think You Know Me by Ryan Green. I hated this book. It is one of the worst books that I have ever read. If you want to go out and give it a try, I absolutely recommend that you do. I absolutely recommend that you go out and you read all 4 of these books. Form your own opinion, form your own judgment. But for me personally, I will probably never pick up a Ryan Green book ever again after reading this book. So this book is about Herb Baumeister. And if you haven't heard of Herb Baumeister, he is the serial killer from the Fox Hollow Farm. I was really interested in reading about Herb Baumeister. I really wanted to read the book The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, Unraveling the History and Haunting of a Serial Killer's Home. That's the one by Richard Graves. Unfortunately, I was not able to get this book, but I was recommended this book instead. So what I did was I read this book, and I read this book from, I don't know why, I think I did it just to prove something to myself. But I read this book front to back, and this book still haunts me. I'm going to be honest. This book still haunts me. First of all, Ryan Green has decided to take a very realistic approach and a very descriptive approach. Every single crime that Herb Baumeister committed, he paints very, very descriptively and very, very graphically. He does not shy away from the crimes, and I appreciate that to an extent. But what I didn't appreciate was having to read it in such graphic detail, having to read how Herb Baumeister either strangled somebody or drowned somebody and then raped them was in graphic detail, was just not what I had in mind when I picked up this book. It was not what I expected when I picked up this book, and I found it very disrespectful to the victims, too. Something else that I did not appreciate about this is he does make the claim that Herb Baumeister is the I-70 strangler. And he does, it does seem like he firmly believes that Herb Baumeister is the I-70 strangler. It's not to say he was or he was not, but to, without a doubt, say, yes, he was the I-70 strangler, I think is a little, it's not outside the norm, but it is, we don't know. We just don't know who the I-70 strangler is. There is no evidence to say that Herb Baumeister is the I-70 strangler. There are other suspects In this case, for those of you who don't know who the I-70 Strangler is, a serial killer who worked between the 1980s and 1991, who murdered at least 12 boys, and all of the bodies were discovered along the Interstate 70. While it is believed the main suspect is Herb Baumeister, it just, as I said, there's other suspects. The only real evidence that they have is that he did commit his other crimes in Indiana. Some of these boys were found in Indiana, and that a witness who saw one of the victims saw him with Herb Baumeister leaving a theater. And they kind of killed in the same way. I mean, the I-70 Strangler obviously strangled people either with an object such as a rope or with his bare hands, and Herb Baumeister obviously drowned his victims. They're in the same category. So that makes people believe that they were the same, but there is no physical evidence to link them to the same person. There's been some lead investigators on this case to say that he was not I-70 Strangler. And there's just a lot on this one strangling case. When it comes to Herb Baumeister, I think it's easier to point the finger at somebody who is no longer here, who can't speak for themselves and go, yeah, it was him, and then just close the case. So one of the other things that I noticed about this book, and I know I am a history person. I've read a lot of nonfiction books. There's no sources in this book. There is nothing. He doesn't list his sources. He doesn't list anything like that in his book. And that kind of bothers me for a nonfiction book. One, when you're making this big claim. Two, when you're trying to get inside the mind of a serial killer. Three, when you're trying to get inside the family dynamic of this serial killer. You don't have a source list. You don't have anything, you didn't mention that you interviewed any family members. You didn't list anything like that. It's a little bit suspicious to me. That's just kind of the things that I had a problem with this book. The biggest thing to me is he really doesn't mention any of the victims. He mentions a few here and there offhandedly, but his main focus is Herb Baumeister. That tied with the graphic depiction of how these victims were killed, it just leaves you with a very stomach-turning feeling. One thing I will say about these books, anything that Ryan Green has written, they're very short. They are true crime. He has written quite a bit of them about pretty much every single serial killer. The big ones, at least. As I said, go out and just try it, judge for yourself. If you're somebody who does not want to read anything that has to deal with child crimes, that has to deal with anything like that, I would stay away from his Herb Baumeister. I saw that he has a John Wayne Gacy. I would probably stay away from that one. I would just look up his book descriptions and go from there. That's what I would do. I would go out and form my own opinion about this book. So let's go with my next book that I would like to talk about. And that is a book that I always recommend. I absolutely love. It is my favorite true crime book of all time. And that is I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara. So this book is, I know it's posthumously published, and it is about her investigation into the Golden State Killer, who was a serial rapist and murderer who terrorized California in the 1970s and 80s. And it blends memoir into investigative journalism, true crime, details her hunt for the elusive killer, who was eventually identified in 2018, fulfilling her dream of bringing him to justice. And sadly, she did not live to see that happen. I love this book. First, I want to put a disclaimer. I am 100% aware that I know the timeline is all over the place, and that can be confusing for people, and that can be frustrating for people. I hear you. I see you. I am there with you. Having said that, Her writing is beautiful. The way that she treats every single victim that she meets is awe-inspiring. This is, in a way, this book is almost the standard of how each book should be done. Yes, it's okay to put yourself a little bit in your book. This is how I got into true crime. She talks about how there was a murder that happened in her own neighborhood and that started this true crime fascination with her. It's okay to put yourself in the narrative, to say, this is how I got here. Now let me tell you these other people's story. I want to know how we got here. I want to know all of this. What she does after that is amazing amount of detective work and investigation and just the care that she puts into this book. But even though I think of this book as the standard in how a true crime book should be written in my mind, I don't think another book should ever be written like this, ever again, because this literally cost her life. She died. She died of an overdose. And I think it's gotten better in the true crime world. I think people's books have gotten better. I think that people who are a part of the true crime community want more. We want to hear the victims. I hold this book to the standard of how true crime books should be, in the care and the detail that she puts into this investigation, the care and the details she puts to everybody that she meets. When she sits down with victims, there is a reason that they ended up opening up to her. I've listened to this audiobook, I think about 5 times already, and I've listened to the afterwards with Patton Oswalt once, and I don't think I can ever listen to it again. I'm getting teary-eyed just thinking about it because it really just, you can feel it. I don't think I'll ever be able to listen to his afterward a second time. My 4th book I want to talk about, and it is a book I absolutely hate. And if you have spent any amount of time with me and talked to me about true crime for more than 5 minutes, I have probably brought up this book and how much I hate this book. It is We Keep the Dead Close, A Murder at Harvard and a Half-Century of Silence by Becky Cooper. So I read this book because of a book club I was in, and that is the only reason I read this book. So this is a true crime memoir investigating the 1969 unsolved murder of a Harvard graduate student named Jane Britton. She was found bludgeoned to death in her apartment. The book details Cooper's decade-long obsession with the case, exploring themes of gender inequality, institutional power of dynamic, and the cowboy culture at Harvard, while piecing together Britton's life and the mystery surrounding her death, which was long shrouded in rumor and silence. Sure, I don't agree with that. Okay, let's get into this. Okay, so background. So yes, this Harvard graduate student named Jane Britton, who was going into archaeology, is murdered. So she was on a date with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend dropped her off at the house, and she ends up getting murdered. And she actually ends up getting raped and murdered. And it is awful. Especially because she was at off-campus apartment, but she went to Harvard. And the university kind of investigated the murder, kind of not. They only investigated for like a little bit of time before they kind of was like, it was off campus. It didn't really have anything to do with us. We're going to let the police handle it. Okay, bye. There was a rumor going around for years, but in 1969, she got really close to a professor. And back when she was murdered, the police questioned this professor, gave him a polygraph test. I know polygraph tests are admissible in court, but still. They gave him a polygraph test. They questioned him for hours. And they didn't release this at the time, but they did find some evidence at the crime scene which did not match this professor's, but they didn't want to say that to the general public because they didn't want to show the cards that they had. So after questioning the professor for hours, giving him a polygraph test, and his DNA did not match what the DNA that they found at the crime scene, he was let go. And of course, like when he exited the police station, everybody was like, they're journalists. And he was allowed to return to Harvard as an archaeology professor. But the rumor was still swirling because this was still an unsolved case. So when Becky Cooper went to Harvard, she heard the rumor that a professor was having an affair with one of his students and he possibly murdered her. But the case was left unsolved. So Becky Cooper put it in her head that I'm going to solve this. Ordinary citizens can't solve true crimes. We've seen it happen. It's possible. But she went around it in, I think, the most bizarre way. She infiltrated his class, and I think that's just weird. So she found Jane Brighton's family and some of her old friends and, contacted them. And so, the family started talking to her because they're like, yeah, sure. If this will solve our daughter's murder, if this will solve our friend's murder, absolutely. We'll help you. There's one sentence I'll never forget. It's the reason really why I hate this book. She's with her boyfriend, and she's like, I'm so consumed by this case. I feel like I'm becoming, I'm taking on the personality, and I'm taking on these traits, and I feel like I'm becoming Jane Brighton herself. What? I can't. That's the moment where I really... And shocker, it was not the professor. It was just some random dude who saw Jane Brighton get dropped off at her apartment with a boyfriend. He followed her up, got into her apartment, and raped and then murdered her. It was just some random guy. Just a random guy. She didn't even know him. But the entire book is just full of in my opinion, nothing. It just goes on and on and on about Jane Brighton and how the Harvard covered up this conspiracy because they wanted to protect their professor when the professor had nothing to do with this case. And she only says it was this random guy within the last 50 pages. Meanwhile, this book is 434 pages long. And she only finds out because they make an arrest while she's writing this book. I would have liked it if she would have expanded on women being attacked living off college campuses and universities doing nothing. I would have liked it if she would have just used Jane Brighton as a jumping off point. Because again, like I was saying with I'll Be Gone in the Dark, there is nothing wrong with saying hey, I was around this case, or hey, I heard this rumor on my campus about this case and I got interested. I wanted to dive deeper. This is how I got started into my true crime. And now I have a book. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that little short tidbit of information. I find it really interesting. I find it it tells us, the audience, who you are as a person, how you got to this point as a person. Those are my 4 books. 2 that I absolutely love and 2 of them that I absolutely don't. But read them yourself. Form your own opinions. I want to give a few honorable mentions to a few other books that I really, really like. They just didn't make the cut. The first book is Vanished in Vermilion, the real story of South Dakota's most infamous cold case. This story is about Pam Jackson and Sherry Miller. The second book is on my honorable mentions is Mindhunter Inside the FBI's Elite Serial Crime Unit by John Douglas. Honestly, I would recommend anything by John Douglas. The third book I want to talk about is Down the Hill, My Descent into the Double Murder in Delphi by Susan Hendricks. Another honorable mention is Who Killed My Daughter? The True Story of a Mother's Search for Her Daughter's Murderer. This is by Lois Duncan. She's the one who wrote I Know What You Did last summer. And then the last book I would recommend is Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder by Pete Eatwell. But yeah, those are my honorable mentions. Thank you all so much for listening in, and thank you for those who have supported me throughout this and pushed me to do this podcast. You know who you are. You all mean so much to me. This is Beyond the Stand with Stephanie. Check out this podcast and my blog at beyondthestand.com.